Hi, my name's Pharaoh, and today I want to talk about the future of No Man's Sky. Now, since the release of the trailer for Light No Fire, many people have been asking, does this mean the end of No Man's Sky? Is the next update, presumably the update for the autophage, Avoid Mother, last part of that storyline that I'm kind of standing in front of now, this guy over here? One consideration is the low number of people that work in Hello Games. I think the team currently is probably around about 50 people. And that's a very small team compared to, say, a AAA title. But on the other side, there's this idea that Hello Games have always said they will continue to develop for No Man's Sky as long as people in their team have things that they want to do, and as long as there's a passionate, active player base that actually want to play that. And I think for the foreseeable future, that's possibly likely. Let's give some context. What Hello Games have actually said is their strategy going forward. They, as a UK company, have to publish annual accounts. They have to at least say who they are, what they're up to, and a general broad idea of how many people work there, how many projects they have running, and just generally a profit and loss. But what they said in that statement about their broad strategy of like the who we are and what we're doing is that No Man's Sky, or at least their current games, including No Man's Sky, were being continually developed partly as a strategy of keeping No Man's Sky and Hello Games as a brand in the public awareness. Another thing that's worth bearing in mind is that they've been saying that Light No Fire began its production, at least the very early development, about 5 years ago. And if we look back 5 years into the history of Hello Games, this was around about the time that Next was dropped. And yes, I can imagine that at that point, when they've just released the first major update to No Man's Sky, it wasn't the first update by any means, but it was the one that really set the tone and the one that really set a direction for where we're going to go with this new game. They changed a lot of some of the core decisions for No Man's Sky at that point, and they've remained the same ever since. The art style, the look and feel, the way that the game plays is very much defined by Next, I would say. It's when they turned the corner and turned it into a playable game that people could get their head around and say, yes, this is a game I want to play. I think it feels quite reasonable that that would be around about the time they first sat down and said, so what's next? Clearly, one of the things that they talked about in that meeting was what we now know as is Light No Fire. The idea that they could use the engine of No Man's Sky in a different way, in a fantasy direction. Maybe they even broached the idea at that point of having a single world. So at that point, I imagine it was a smaller team, probably the lead developers and a couple of people that had ideas about fantasy games, brainstorming and coming up with concepts, and mostly on paper and drawing and just hacking out what the game would be. I wouldn't be surprised if some of that initial experimentation was in the game engine, seeing if they could make different types of planets, what kind of world would they use, would they use a flat world? Those kinds of questions were probably being answered with little coding experiments. Now, since this time, Hello Games have expanded quite a lot, and they've also opened a completely separate office in Cambridge. And that, to me, always suggested that they were looking into developing their engine. Why would you open a second office in Cambridge? There are two potential reasons that I can see. Cambridge is a university town. It's very well known for its technology. The Cambridge Science Park, where they're operated, has lots of technology companies that actively recruit Cambridge graduates. It's a very interesting project for, I would imagine, quite a few Cambridge graduates, because it's very cutting edge mathematical procedural generation. That's a certain type of AI, which is obviously a very popular thing at the moment, because we're it creates certain assets on the fly. There are all sorts of reasons why people might want to get their teeth into projects like that and maybe work for Hello Games. But the expansion has led to what in interviews Sean has described as a very fluid approach to game development. It sounds like they move from one project to another depending on what they're passionate about. So you can imagine, for instance, a team that was very focused on No Man's Sky, but would occasionally step across and help out the Light No Fire development process because they have some interest in something that's happening there. I imagine there's been quite a lot of parallel development in that way. For instance, who's to say that the fact that we now can wear capes in No Man's Sky, and have done for quite a while, wasn't part of the development process of Light No Fire? Somebody said, well, there have been calls for capes, maybe some pictures of PCs with capes in the past on some of our marketing material. Let's put them in. And so they already had something that was mostly working, and they put it into No Man's Sky. I can't help thinking that things like pets were also part of that process. So in this context, I can imagine people that are working in the wider team still having a certain amount of passion for No Man's Sky. Now, on the flip side, Sean has said in interviews, when talking about the way that this passion is part of why things are going on, he has suggested that he could imagine, and has in the past imagined, that No Man's Sky may not be developed forever. And for the same reasons, the player base may demise, the passion of the developers may demise. I imagine those two things go hand in hand. I imagine it's very exciting for a development team to be throwing out new content to a receptive audience. I mean, even if we all hate it, I imagine that's quite an exciting and exhilarating thing to be working in, throwing stuff out there and seeing how we react. Clearly, the first factor will end, that factor of it being a big marketing exercise, keeping it all in our public eye, that factor will actually end when Light No Fire either has a release date or is released. At that point, the press and many players will be talking about that new game that's coming out, whether they're going to buy it, whether they're going to pre-order it, whether they're going to wait and see, whether they're going to give it a couple of years because they remember the beginning of No Man's Sky. All those questions will be more in focus once they've made those initial concrete decisions. But I also imagine one of the messages that they will want to convey is this is from a company that are continuing to develop games for people. They haven't dropped the development of No Man's Sky, because that's also marketing for the new game, is that, look, we are actively developing, we are still making stuff for this game, we're still passionate about this other game, and we will be passionate about this new game for many years to come. In fact, that's almost pretty much what Sean said in the interview when announcing Light No Fire. He effectively said, hopefully we'll be still developing Light No Fire in 10 years time. And I think to some extent that's almost a statement to say, like we will be after 10 years of No Man's Sky. These ideas are quite mutually dependent, though, whether or not we are going to still be passionate about it, whether they're going to be passionate about it. So to that extent, that element is probably a game of diminishing returns. But if we think about the recent developments in No Man's Sky over the last few years, then a lot of it has been consolidation and creating a platform to build upon that doesn't require such major work. I would think, say, for instance, from Origins onwards, there has been this move towards integrating things into an existing system, and that idea that they didn't want to do a complete reset anymore, that we've already got a player base that are invested in the places that they go to and their bases and their favourite animals, etc. And from this point on, around about Origins time, everything is going to be additional. I think that was the big shift. They mentioned it at the time, and I don't think everybody fully understood, but if you look back at the pattern of events since Origins, it's mostly been exception-based game design, where you say, okay, we're going to have an Outlaw update. What we will do is we will say, when you travel to this system, instead of it looking like it does now, it will look slightly different. And so there's an exception in the code there. The baseline code says that that system is a standard system, and then there's an exception that says actually this one is an Outlaw system, so some of the ships are different, the space station's different, the market's different, the way that the ship classes and the multi-tool classes spawn are different. And there have been other things along the way that have been very similar. Let's look at the most recent example. This last year we've seen the autophage come along, and they've taken advantage of already existent points of interest. Say, for instance, you now go to a drop pod, and then you can suddenly make the autophage appear as if they've always been there hidden. And that's an iterative process, an exception-based process that says if you've progressed enough to open up this lore, if you've done the Artemis quest, then you can now add this little bit into the game. So, in a way, everything from about Waypoint and Origins onwards, Waypoint being the time when they really finalized how the progression system worked. They kind of tidied up how progression worked in general. Since that stage, I feel we are in an end game of a sort. We are in a time when fundamental things about the game will not change, but things may be added in. But we're still seeing a few things being added and tweaked. For instance, when they introduced the Mac port, there were quite a lot of rumors flowing around that they were working on changing the code base. And I think we saw some evidence of this. I don't think it was just a rumor. I do think that we saw some of the engine degraded for a while and then slowly got fixed again. I feel like now the game is running very smoothly again, but that was a process that happened around that time, and I don't think that's a coincidence. Most recently, we saw a change to the physics engine and the gravity and things like that, and they had an impact on the game. They broke things like the autophage all sunk into the ground and some things fell through the floor of their freighter, and then that was slowly fixed again. These aren't major issues in the game, but they are core elements of that structure that I mentioned before, that platform which they were developing on. They're actually still going back and occasionally tinkering with that platform. Now that to me suggests that they have more things in line. They wouldn't make those changes unless, for instance, the very next update might have something to do with the way the physics engine is now. But where does this leave us in the longer term? The interest in Light No Fire has been huge. I imagine it's surpassed their expectations. It certainly surpassed my expectations. The number of people that watched the trailer, for instance, is huge. They did take advantage of that and to some extent monetize that using YouTube, which may have helped pay for the marketing exercise in the first place. But I feel like the excitement itself was partly built off of Hello Games' track record. Their strategy worked. With this update in the pipeline, I imagine again that Sean will probably make a few press statements. He won't say a lot because he never does, but he might give a few more tidbits about the Light No Fire game. He might touch on the future of No Man's Sky. And I see the future of No Man's Sky as having two possible scenarios over the next 3 to 5 years. One would be the idea of a controlled demise. They will slowly do less and less, just keep it ticking over. Or one of expansion. And you might think, well, that seems a bit of a strange idea. Why would they expand upon a game that has been around for so long? But again, we'd go back to that strategy, keeping themselves in the public eye. I wouldn't be surprised if they had some plans for the IP. If we were to walk around the corner here, we'd go and talk to Nada and Polo, and players of No Man's Sky have built up a relationship with those guys. Personally, I don't trust Nada as far as I could throw him, and I couldn't throw him very far. And I don't trust him it's part of my relationship with the game, and that's a great thing for a game company to have characters and lore and things that we talk about on, say, Reddit, that we are passionate about. Because of that lore, many of the older players and even some of the newer players that have started to read up on it would love to go and see the dark, glorious history of the first Spawn, that empire in its pomp as it was about to do its wicked deeds across the galaxy, stand on Balaron, their home planet, see the vast oceans that they no doubt had, because they seem to be based on a ship building concept originally. And so that would be a great thing to go and witness. Equally, it would be great to go and see a huge Viking fleet as it gears up for galactic war, taking on the Sentinels, for instance. That would have been a fascinating thing to see. I'd love to play a game that took in that. I'd love to play a game that allowed us to go to the huge technological city of city planet of Corvax Prime. I imagine that would be a great thing to witness in a game. And again, this is something that Hello Games have created and built upon in a way that's made at least me and other people that I talk to passionate about that intellectual property. No Man's Sky couldn't show us Balaron. It couldn't take us to Corvax Prime because the engine just isn't up to it. But we could theoretically see a different game do this. And if they wanted to really leverage that intellectual property in a way that would make us excited, they could do this by introducing a brand new game with a totally different engine, a totally different approach, a totally different style of game. Not No Man's Sky 2, which is something they've always said they didn't want to do. Not like a copy of No Man's Sky, but with some extra features. But a completely different game that maybe, for instance, we could see a fleet management game or a city building game or whatever the developers of No Man's Sky are passionate about. We know that Sean, for instance, is a gamer and likes playing different games. I'm sure many of the members of the development team are passionate about lots of different types of games and would love to create some of them. And if they want to do this, if they want to develop the intellectual property into future properties, then that's another reason why they might continue to develop No Man's Sky, to keep again our focus on these characters. And to some extent, I believe that they're already doing this. I think there's some hints and teasers in what we've seen so far that could suggest that this could be something they're interested in. And that takes me to not so much what's the future of No Man's Sky, but a future video. What's the grand plan that Hello Games have for the intellectual property of No Man's Sky? And what are the clues we're seeing in the lore that would suggest what that grand plan might be? So I'll be covering that in a future video. I hope you found this interesting as a discussion point. Include some ideas in the comments below if you think that I'm talking complete rubbish, or if you hate the idea of intellectual property being a thing in Hello Games, then let me know. But in the meantime, travel well. I've been Pharaoh, and goodbye for now. Goodbye.